Hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on Europe and sustainable development. We're currently letting participants in, so we will get started in about a minute or so. This is a webinar organized by the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and specifically focused on Europe and the sustainable development goals. Okay, so I see that we have more than 100 participants live, and of course, this event would also be recorded and posted afterwards on SDSN's YouTube channel. So we have 100 people I can see from all over Europe, and the numbers are growing. So I think we'll get started. So welcome again to this webinar on Europe and sustainable development. My name is Guillaume Lafortune. I'm the Vice President at the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. And as part of my work at the SDSN, I coordinate the work on data and statistics, including the work and the series of report, the Sustainable Development Report series. This event was scheduled a few weeks ago, and it is featuring the official launch of the 7th edition of the Europe Sustainable Development Report, which is prepared by the SDG Transformation Center at SDSN in cooperation with our longtime friends and colleagues at the European Economic and Social Committee, with the generous financial support from the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung European Union Global Dialogue, and also with technical support from our academic publisher, the Dublin University Press. I'd like to thank already all the speakers and the panelists that will join us today for their contribution today, but also for their contribution to the report. Many of the speakers that you will hear today actually provided written inputs this year to the report, so we're very grateful for this. And for the audience here, the report can be accessed, and the databases are all public goods and are available on the Transformation Center website. I'm actually very excited about this webinar. I think we have a wonderful lineup of speakers today, with all three pillars of EU governance actually represented today in one way or another. So we've got the European Parliament, the Council presidency, and the European Commission as well. I'm also excited because as a European, I mean, I'm also Canadian. I believe this is a critical and defining moment for European countries. I mean, for the world, of course, but European countries in particular, and medium-sized economies at large. The report was, of course, officially released on February 26th in Brussels, and the webinar was scheduled even earlier than that. Of course, since we launched the report, actually 2 days after the launch of the report, we have now a major raging war in West Asia, with immediate and perhaps also medium and long-term consequences for Europe. And I think this is also part of the discussion we want to have today. Essentially, what we'll try to do over the next hour and a half to 2 hours today is to strike a balance between two elements. One is, on one hand, the short-term immediate considerations for Europe, and in particular, the implications of the war in West Asia, but also of the emerging multipolar world, and the opposition since last year of Europe's traditional ally or historical ally to this agenda, to the SDGs and the sustainable development paradigm. I'm, of course, talking about the opposition of the US to this agenda, and the threats to its territorial integrity over the past couple of months and even days, including in Greenland, but also growing security concerns in Southern Europe and East Europe. So that's one part, of course, of the conversation. But we also want to think more about longer term considerations for Europe and the solutions, pathways for the sustainability agenda. in the context where the EU is currently negotiating its long-term budget, the so-called multi-annual financial framework, which will essentially define the long-term financial priorities of Europe well into the next decade. This budget will basically span from 2028 to 2034. But also in the context where, and we just had yesterday a webinar on accelerating SDG progress to 2030, in the context where there's, of course, a lot of discussions around how do we keep this agenda alive, but also how are we going to adopt a ambitious post-2030 agenda. And of course, Europe played a very significant role before the adoption of the SDGs in driving this agenda forward. So in essence, and I think we're staying faithful essentially to the words of Jacques Delors, which said about a decade ago, former president of the European Commission, that Europe needs both firefighters but also architects. And so I think we'll try to cover both aspects today, the urgent priorities for Europe, but also longer term considerations. The webinar is structured in three parts. We'll hear first from we'll have opening remarks from two speakers. We'll hear from Professor Sachs first, and then Ambassador Donoghue. Then we'll have a brief overview of the report's finding, which will be provided by my colleague Grayson Fuller, which will be followed by statements from representatives from the three pillars of the EU governance, and also by Phoebe Koundouri, who's currently co-chairing a very important process, UN process and report, the Global Sustainable Development Report, and who also provided a wonderful contribution to this year's report. And finally, we will speak about solutions, civil society contributions, and pathways. And we'll hear from Stoyan Chukhanov at the EESC, Prajal Pradhan at the University of Groningen, and my colleague Davide Kozza on FABLE, on sustainable agri-food systems. And after each of those three blocks, we'll try to take questions and comments, perhaps one or two each time. So feel free to put your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll try to pick some of those. If we don't have the time to answer them during the webinar, we'll keep track of those questions and try to answer them in the coming days and weeks, especially technical questions related to the findings of the report. So we have a lot to go through over the next 2 hours, so let's get started. And for this first block and those opening remarks, we'll hear from Professor Jeffrey Sachs, of course, president of the SDSN, university professor at Columbia. And this will be followed by also an intervention by Ambassador David Donoghue. I think it's wonderful to have David also with us because, of course, David served from as in 2013 as permanent representative of Ireland to the United Nations, and co-facilitated the negotiations of the SDGs. So it's wonderful to have David with us today. And I think those initial interventions might focus a bit, if I use SDG language, more on SDG 16 around peace, but also on the SDG 17, the partnerships for the goals, which are, of course, critical enablers for achieving all of the other goals. So Jeff, I'll turn over to you first. And I just wanted to start because just before you dive in, just to mention, the report was launched on February 26th, and on page 9 of the report, and I'm actually reading it, so it was drafted a little bit after Davos, and we had this statement in the report that says, as the EU seeks to broaden its alliances and reinforce its global role, success will depend on articulating a coherent European voice and translating it into consistent international action. For that purpose, it will be critical for Europe to demonstrate in a coherent and consistent way its support for UN-based multilateralism, notably via the systemic condemnation of violations of international law, including all wars of choice as well as covert and overt regime change operations prohibited under the UN Charter. So 2 questions for you. How would you qualify the Europeans' initial response to the war in West Asia? And then I think you know 1 or 2 things about economic crisis and oil crisis. What do you think might be the short and medium-term impacts for Europe in terms of energy prices, economic growth, European living standards at large? Basically, is Europe particularly exposed right now to this conflict?
Great. Well, thank you very much, Guillaume, and congratulations to the team that has prepared this. It's another great report and a very important one at a very important time. Let me address those two questions in a little bit broader context, if I might, to begin. Europe was really the progenitor of the SDG agenda. The Sustainable Development concept came out of Europe, and the Sustainable Development Goals, to a very important extent, were European-led. And David Donahue played an enormous role in that context and reflected Europe's unique contribution. All during the past 11 years, all of our reports have shown that Europe is in the lead of achieving the SDGs. Europe started ahead, and it remains the top-ranked region of the world. But Europe has lost the initiative. Europe's not moving. Europe is not talking about the SDGs. Europe is not using the SDGs as a diplomatic framework. It's not using the SDGs at the Commission level as a work program. And the SDGs are hardly mentioned in Europe compared to the rest of the world, which I see in my pretty much nonstop travels when I speak with governments. Europe has basically lost its way. This is the first point. It's also lost its progress. Europe is stuck and in some ways retrogressing. So there are many shocks, but Europe basically suffers the shocks rather than manages them also. Europe is not a protagonist, it is a reactor at this point. So this is a starting point. What does Europe need? What should it be doing? First, there should be a long-term plan in Europe for sustainable development. It doesn't exist. There are long-term objectives, but no long-term plans. Have a look at China's 15th plan, which was released last week, and compare it to anything that Europe is producing. Europe doesn't have a planned framework at the European-wide level. Most European countries do not have plans either, even within their countries. This is also par for the course. The United States doesn't have a plan for the next 10 minutes. Europe probably has plans for the next year. That's better than the US, but it does not have plans for sustainable development. Second, Europe does not have an effective European-wide investment program to support the SDGs. This is something that has amazed me over the last 10 years. There should be a strategy for the regional green power grid. This is obvious, trivial, but this kind of infrastructure planning at the EU-wide level, while much talked about, and with pieces funded by EIB, basically does not exist. Europe remains planning at the national level for investments to an amazing extent. Third, Europe lacks industrial policy. It just doesn't have champions in almost any area of green and digital technology. And it let the United States pick Europe apart. Whenever there were great companies in Europe, the US basically grabbed them. And this is Europe's big shortcoming. The great industrial policy success of Europe is Airbus, but it hasn't been replicated in any of the green and digital technologies. There's no European-wide champions. So all of that is, I think, the need for a new strategy. Mario Draghi introduced some good ideas. They were quickly ignored, and there is no strategy. Europe is just reacting to events. Let me turn quickly to the diplomatic side, therefore. The first thing that Europe needs, in addition to European-wide strategy, is strategies for the near neighborhood, of which Europe has none. It has policies, but it has no strategies for North Africa, for the Eastern Mediterranean, and for Russia, all its neighbors. For Russia, the policy is Russophobia. This is not a policy. It's an excuse. For North Africa and the Eastern Mediterranean, there is no effective policy. Will North Africa sell its solar energy to Europe? Who knows? Will the Middle East? Who knows? It's not even discussed. There is no regional strategy with the near neighborhood, though that is a feature, supposedly, of European foreign policy. Europe's strategy with more distant regions is even worse. Sorry. First, the United States is not an ally. Sorry. It's not an ally. I know most Europeans or many Europeans went to school in the United States. They like the United States. The US government is not an ally of Europe. It does not have Europe's interest in mind. It is not defending Europe. It is a global hegemonic power that uses Europe. So that's Europe's first mistake. And Europe's second mistake is antagonism to China, because China, Europe, trade, investment, innovation would really transform the world. But Europe followed the United States into an anti-China policy. Of course, Europe lost the initiative on electric vehicles because of the delays of the European automotive sector. Now it just wants protectionism against China. So the interregional diplomacy is really messed up. The US is considered the great friend. It's no friend at all. China is considered the great enemy. It's no enemy at all. And so everything is confused. And the final point I would make is Europe is not defending the United Nations system. And that is core to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I attended one of the most shocking meetings of the UN Security Council last weekend. I was invited to speak after the attack on Iran by Israel and the United States. And then I was blocked from speaking by the US and UK, which prevented me from taking the floor. But I sat through the proceedings, and every European speaker went out of their way to attack Iran rather than to attack the United States and Israel for attacking Iran. It was the most surrealistic session I've ever been in, as if we're in a different world. The US and Israel have launched a war of aggression, of naked aggression, against Iran for the second time in the context of supposed negotiations taking place. And the best that European ambassadors could do was to attack Iran. This is not going to save the UN. It's going to destroy the UN. And it's not going to protect Europe either when the United States occupies Greenland. And when I went up to make that observation to the Danish ambassador, because she spent her whole intervention attacking Iran on the day that Iran was invaded and bombed and its leaders were murdered, she turned her back and walked away because she did not want to discuss this. I was polite. She was rude. So all of this is to say, I'm sorry to say that the region that brought us the SDGs and that leads in the SDGs and that could have made this the centerpiece of not only Europe's economy, but Europe's global leadership is lost right now. So these are not hostile remarks. They're sad, and they are meant to be a spur to do better, because Europe is the natural leader of this agenda. It should share with the rest of the world its knowledge and capacity. It should invest to complete the job. It could do all of these things. It should end its incredible Russophobia, its incredible US philia, its incredible Chinese disdain, and get its head on straight about the world and be a leader in the world. for peace and for sustainable development. As for what's going to happen, just to finish specifically on West Asia, the US and Europe and Israel are rogue nations. The US wants global hegemony, Israel wants regional hegemony. They will destroy the Middle East if this continues for long. And that will create a massive economic crisis for Europe, by the way, because Europe is an oil importing region. I came into this profession 46 years ago, writing the first study of the oil shocks of the 1970s, and published the book, The Economics of Worldwide Stagflation, in 1982. We're doing it again. And every day that this war continues, the crisis will be deeper and Europe will pay a very heavy price. And the crisis is not caused by Iran. The crisis is caused by Israel and the United States. So that's my bottom line. Thank you very much. Thanks for the report. And please, Europe, everybody in Europe, lead as you should and as you can. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jeff. I know you need to leave in a minute. Just if you can briefly comment also on the following.
Yes.
Perhaps on the issue of democracy and war, democracy being, of course, an important value in Europe. There was a speech to the ambassadors by von der Leyen 2 days ago, which again referred, of course, to democracy being a foundational value of Europe. There was the New York Times article, of course, yesterday that showed the popular support in the US for this war in West Asia, in Iran, which was very low, actually much lower than popular support for the war in Iraq, even lower for than popular support for the war in Libya. So my question is very straightforward. It seems like people don't back up this policy. Is foreign policy a democratic affair?
Well, first, in Europe, virtually every political leader is unpopular right now. Merz's approval rating is 18%. Macron's approval rating is around 10%. Starmer's approval rating is around 12%. All of the creators of the European foreign policy, both within the EU and in the neighborhood in Britain, are very unpopular. So this is because the policies are not based on democratic deliberation. In the United States, nobody asked for one moment about America's policy towards Israel as it was committing genocide in Gaza. And nobody asked for one moment about whether to have war with Iran. This is all taken by our security state apparatus without any scrutiny whatsoever. And when the Senate was asked, do you want to exercise your constitutional powers? They said, no, thank you. They don't even want to look at it or have any responsibility for it. So this is not democracy in the slightest. And the American public is on the right side of all of these issues. This has nothing to do with American public opinion. This has to do with elite decision-making that, in my view, is extraordinarily reckless, vile, illegal, dangerous, explosive, but not in any way reflecting democratic procedures, deliberations, or public support.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. I know you need to run, but thank you for your opening remarks. It sets us up very, very well for today's event. Let's now move perhaps to Ambassador David Donoghue. I mentioned it briefly, but you had a very long and varied career in Ireland's Departments of Foreign Affairs from 2013 to 2017. You were permanent representative of Ireland at the United Nations, and you served as co-facilitator with Kenya for the UN negotiations, which led to the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015. Thank you for the wonderful foreword that you wrote to this year's report. We saw each other in Brussels also a few days ago at the event hosted by the European Economic and Social Committee. Your foreword focused on priorities to accelerate SDG progress in Europe, but also on Europe's leadership when it comes to the post-2030 agenda. So if you could perhaps summarize a little bit your thoughts and views on those fronts, and perhaps I'm using it just the opportunity, since you're from Ireland also, and Ireland will have the presidency of the Council of the EU in a few months. If you could also comment on your thoughts around the upcoming Irish presidency of the Council of the EU and what you expect from it. David, the floor is yours.
Sure, Guillaume. Thank you very, very much. Great pleasure to be here. Much of what Jeff Sachs just said resonates strongly with me. I won't cover the same ground again, but look, if I look back at the role played by Europe in the creation of the SDGs, it was quite prominent. It was definitely a leadership role which we haven't really seen since. To be honest, at the time, we all thought that Europe would. When I say Europe, I really mean the EU, that it would continue with this leadership role in the immediate years, in the aftermath, in the first years of implementation. We were gradually a little bit disappointed to find that the enthusiasm that it had shown in the negotiations wasn't really matched in the first few years. Partly, I think, because there was a sense that the member states of the European Union should carry the responsibility for implementation. That was slightly misplaced. But anyway, it changed when we had the first Commission led by Ursula von der Leyen, when there was a distinct sort of refocusing on the SDGs, and that was very, very welcome. It was accompanied, of course, also by the European Green Deal, and also I remember that individual commissioners, members of the Commission, were asked to align their work areas with the SDGs specifically. So there was a lot of valuable political emphasis on the SDGs at that time. I'm afraid that it has slipped, and Jeff has pointed out a number of things. The work programme for the current Commission doesn't make any reference to it. It must be said that there are some other documents which do. I mean, the mission letters sent by the President of the Commission to individual commissioners do ask them to address the SDGs. But overall, I think we have lost a fair amount of political impetus. There are obviously competing agendas, including the competition from defence budgets. There's a general sort of fatigue which is being reported, that private sector interests and European corporations are becoming a bit impatient with the demands of sustainability. I mean, there's a certain, there's a fair amount of speculation as to why there has been this lack of impetus. But the truth is that the individual member states, or some of them, are still doing very well in terms of achievement. I mean, I know that Finland is currently at the top of the scale, and Jeff is absolutely right that overall most of the implementation, or the most consistent implementation of the SDGs, has come from Europe, and I think that is continuing to be the case, although the performance is a bit uneven. However, if I think about where we are now, there is clearly a need for Europe to recommit itself to the objectives we all agreed to in 2015. There is a vacuum, frankly. Europe has lost. I mean, Jeff describes it as having lost its way. I can understand and relate to that. There are some positive things one can point to, nevertheless. I did think that it was significant that a few years ago the European Union volunteered to do a voluntary review of its performance under the SDGs. That was a very good thing. It was well received at the UN, and frankly, I'd like to see it happen again. It showed that the European Union was thinking creatively about what it could do to advance the SDGs, both as union and as individual member states. The Global Gateway Programme, and I'm sure others will talk about it, does contain some potential to accelerate implementation of the SDGs, even though some people will be uneasy about the mixture of agendas there, the conflation perhaps of a development agenda with the pursuit of trade objectives. But nevertheless, there is a significant amount of investment potential there, which could go to the benefit of the SDGs. My key point, Guillaume, is that I hope that Europe will recognise the opportunity which a post-2030 agenda presents to us all. That is to say that, yes, we have another few years to go coming up to 2030, but we all know that it's not going to end there. In some way, I mean, my guess is that we will be continuing worldwide with a very similar agenda beyond 2030. That is my personal guess. I don't think that the whole project will suddenly come to an end. One way or another, whether this involves detailed negotiations or whether there's some other approach taken, one way or another, Europe can and must play a leadership role in, first of all, ensuring that we have a similar development program going forward, that's to say, of similar ambition globally. The cause of multinational cooperation is one which is under attack at the moment, and Europe is best placed, to put it very mildly, to show that it is committed to multinational cooperation and recognizes the benefits of multinational cooperation. So I do hope that Europe will move into this space over the next couple of years as the prospect of a post-2030 agenda becomes more real and more tangible. I think at the very least it could show that it is taking seriously the relationships with other parts of the world to which Jeff has referred. That is to say, the partnerships with Africa, Asia, Latin America. Europe needs, in any event, to redefine its strategic priorities in the current extremely volatile and changing environment. So the SDGs, in a way, are the ideal vehicle for this. They capture the current agenda captures Europe's own core values and in a way shows Europe at its best. Now, whether Europe had absolutely the lead role in framing the SDGs, one can dispute that, but one way or another, Europe did have a strong impact on that agenda, and I think it absolutely must do the same for the future agenda. In relation to the Irish presidency, my only caveat there, Guillaume, is that a president, first of all, priorities haven't yet been defined for that presidency. And I know that to some extent one has to fit in with preceding and subsequent presidencies. But I'm fairly confident that Ireland will show that it remains extremely committed to an agenda on the lines of the current 2030 agenda for sustainable development. I'm fairly sure that Ireland will be a champion of it and will, I hope, bring its own influence to bear within the EU. I mean, clearly, we're in a situation where ODA levels are falling, other demands are making themselves felt. I suspect that Ireland will be one of the more vocal champions for continuing to devote a significant part of the European Union's resources to this agenda. I can't really say much more than that, but I'm fairly confident that Ireland will be telling a good story. And look, I'll leave it at that. I've probably reached my limits, but I hope that has covered most of the points. Thanks, Guillaume.
David, this was excellent, and again, a huge thanks. I mean, if people want to read also your foreword with these ideas are put on paper, also it's available, of course, on the website. And you're right, of course, there is currently a Cyprus presidency of the Council of the EU, and we're very privileged today. We have colleagues from Cyprus that will be speaking in a moment, Madame Eleni Nicolaidou. Just perhaps a word, because you mentioned this evolution in the European terminology. We hear, of course, a lot about strategic autonomy, competitiveness, and other terms. I saw in the chat colleagues from Vietnam, so I just wanted to flag the following. A couple of weeks ago in January, Vietnam adopted a government resolution specifically targeting competitiveness, and now aims to enter the top 50 in the ranking of the SDG index. And so this idea that competitiveness can be linked with the sustainability agenda, I think is very prominent in many parts of the world. And perhaps there might be ways to reconnect also this terminology in Europe, because I think we see it every day, that advancing towards renewable renewable energy, clean energy systems contributes to strategic autonomy, of course, and competitiveness, in addition, of course, to achieving the rest of the SDGs. Let's now move to I hope you can stay, by the way, David, because
Sure.
we'll take a round
Yeah.
of questions afterwards, and I
Yeah.
think some of them might be targeted at you. But let's now move, because we have some speakers that will also need to leave at some point. So let's now move to the presentation of the key findings of the European Sustainable Development Report. So Grayson will provide now a brief overview. Of course, Grayson will not be able to go through the entire sets of results. There's 115 indicators that go into this, which overall corresponds to about 55,000 individual indicators, because there are time series and it covers more than the EU 27 countries. So it's a huge amount of data and results that is provided, again, as public good. So you are all welcome to use, download, reuse this database. So Grayson will provide a brief overview now, and then we'll move to comments and reactions from institutions. Grayson, over to you on the presentation of the results.
All right. Thank you so much, Guillaume, for that introduction. It is my pleasure today to go through some of the key results and findings of this year's Europe Sustainable Development Reports 2026. Just a quick note to say that the Europe Sustainable Development Report 2026 is our 7th edition of this report, the fruit of our collaboration with the Europe Economic and Social Committee, and it is part of a broader family of reports that we work on at SDSN, looking at SDG progress, both in the world and in different regions and some national entities. The great thing about these reports is that we can use local data, so data from the European services, and also look at different challenges specific to the region or country that we're looking at. In terms of the data that is used to compile this report, most of it does indeed come from Eurostat and the different services and agencies of the European Commission. We also use some data from non-official sources, such as geoinformation services, NGOs, and the peer-reviewed literature, as well as some other official institutions from the UN. For the methods, I won't go today into the details of the methodology, but I will say that it's all available online. It has been statistically audited by the Joint Research Center, and we try to make sure that all of the data and the methods used to compile the reports are clear, transparent, and available to broad sets of people, policymakers, and stakeholders that are interested in working on sustainable development in their countries. Our indicator selection every year is more or less stable, but we do make a few changes to make sure that we're keeping up with the latest policy changes and developments in Europe and the new data sets that are becoming available. I think here I would just want to point out this new indicator on the gap in population reporting pollution, crime, or other environmental problems by income, because this indicator kind of shows a nexus between income inequality and inequalities in exposure to environmental problems. So there are a lot of different indicators that show interesting SDG priorities across the SDGs. To first go into some of the policy elements, as some of the speakers mentioned today, we do see a kind of decline in references to the SDGs in the annual Commission work plans. So both in the first Juncker Commission and the von der Leyen Commission, we see several references to the SDGs, and this has kind of stopped since 2025. This has been accompanied by delays and dilutions of some of the key regulations and directives on environmental protections, such as this CSRD, due diligence, and deforestation ban. But this doesn't mean that this reflects a backsliding in SDG prioritization at all levels of European leadership. So both at the level of the member states, the European Council, and the Parliament, we do see continued work on SDGs through, for example, the Council's Working Party and a resolution done by the European Parliament just last year. And also, as our speakers mentioned, we also want to see how countries are working together on these global issues. So we have a dedicated index that looks at how countries are supporting UN-based multilateralism using 6 key indicators, which you see here below: some major treaties, votes with the majority, membership in UN organizations, participation in conflicts and militarization, UCMs, and contribution to the UN budget. And we have all the data and the methods for this in a dedicated platform, which is also freely available online. Now, to get into the results of this year's report, I just want to say a bit of context about the performance of Europe. So, of course, when we look globally, Europe is an SDG leader. in our global index, almost all the countries in the top 20 positions are European countries. And when we look at the status of SDG targets, we see in the world, there's maybe about 20% of targets that are on track, but more than 50% of the targets are on track within Europe. Now, this is not to say that there are not issues, but globally, the situation is relatively good. Now, of course, this progress on SDGs is uneven across countries. So here you see the results of this year's SDG index with Finland on top. Nordic countries typically top the Europe Sustainable Development Report's SDG index. And when we look at the time series, we do see a sort of inflection point at 2020. So there's sort of key progress being made from 2015 to 2019, and ever since, this kind of shock of the pandemic and consequential wars, there has been a slowdown in SDG progress for the last 4 years. In terms of the key challenges that we see for Europe, I would summarize them as such. So we have a slowdown in progress since 2020. In 2020, there are issues on environmental protection and sustainable agriculture, as you can see here in the dashboards, SDGs 12, 13, 14, 15, and SDG 2. There are issues when it comes to reducing inequalities and the Lead One Behind agenda, convergence and outcomes across countries in the European regions, and lastly, persisting issues on international spillovers. It's interesting to see when we look at specifically inequalities across population groups that there can be really, really big gaps in Europe. So for example, here we have this indicator gap in self-reported health by income. We see that only very few countries are on track and most are actually going in the wrong direction. Even though health outcomes in Europe are relatively good, when we look at inequalities, we see the situation is different. And even when we look at trends over time, so here we have some of our top performers on the SDG index, Finland, Germany, and Sweden. We see that even these countries have major issues since 2020 when it comes to reducing their severe material and social deprivation rates. Another side on international spillovers, here we see in Europe that spillovers continue to be a major source of SDG challenges. When we look at GHG emissions, these continue to make up around 40% of the total GHG emission footprint for European countries. And ODA, which is sort of positive financial spillover that we also look at, we see that there have been major declines in almost all of European countries in the last year. And just a quick note to say that, we have far more detailed results, the data, country profiles, all in our online platform, which you can consult at the SDG Transformation Center. And I had to go quickly because of the time constraints, but feel free to ask questions about the data, indicator methods that went into building the reports. Thank you so much, everyone.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Grayson. And as Grayson said, if you have technical specific questions, you can ask them in the chat or also follow up with us via email. Now we'll move to some reactions and interventions from the European institutions. I think we have MEP Barry Andrews that joined us, and I know. First of all, thank you for joining us. I know it's a busy day at the Parliament, but I think you also have to leave in a few minutes. So I wanted to start perhaps with you, and then we'll move to the Cyprus presidency of the Council of the EU, the Commission, and then we'll hear also from Phoebe afterwards. Barry, you are, of course, member of the European Parliament from Ireland. You set up a few years ago, I still remember those days, this SDG Alliance of the European Parliament. You're, I believe, currently, since 2024, the chair of the Committee on Development of the European Parliament. So give us your thoughts on the state of sustainability in Europe. Feel free also to bring in the international partnerships and dimension to this. In his introductory remarks, Ambassador Donoghue mentioned that he put a lot of expectations on the Global Gateway program, for instance. So yeah, the floor is yours, Barry.
Well, thank you, Guillaume. Thank you very much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me and see me okay. I'm delighted to join you. I'm very sorry I didn't hear David or Professor Sachs earlier on, and I just got to the middle of the last presentation. And I think what I saw didn't surprise me in very, very much, and especially in terms of the references to the SDGs in documents that are emerging from the Commission, or indeed in debates that are being conducted in the European Parliament. So, as you also mentioned, Guillaume, we had an SDG alliance in the last mandate. I tried to set it up again in this mandate. However, there wasn't sufficient support among the parliamentarians to proceed with the SDG Alliance. Nevertheless, the SDGs featured in all of the mission letters that were distributed by President von der Leyen to her commissioners at the beginning of the mandate. But again, it repeated, I think, the flaw that we had in the last mandate, namely that because everybody had responsibility, in fact, there was nobody that was providing the political capital to drive the Agenda 2030 across the institutions as one would have liked. The context everybody is familiar with is the dramatic geopolitical tensions, the reduction in support for multilateralism, and as was mentioned in the last presentation, the dramatic fall in official development assistance across the OECD countries. And it's in this context that we have this discussion, whether we're discussing energy or transport or any economic issues and trade in particular. The context is always around competitiveness and security. And the framing previously around sustainability is absent, but that doesn't mean that the same objectives can't be achieved. So, for example, there is obviously an enormous energy and urgency around renewable energy sources in the European institutions right now. That's been turbocharged. The framing might not be the same as it was in 2019 and 2020, leading to the Green Deal, but the objectives to try to decarbonize, to lessen reliance on fossils and hydrocarbons, and to increase the generation and transmission of electricity across the European Union. All of that is very much part of the Draghi report and the overall priorities of the European Union. I think it's very important to point that out. Guillaume, you also mentioned the Global Gateway. I think this is best understood as the external element of the European Union's industrial policy. The tension that people on this webinar will be very well aware of is how do you reconcile, on the one hand, trying to demonstrate the European Union as a reliable long-term development partner for developing countries, while at the same time overtly pursuing Europe's interests. That is something that some people argue it's impossible to reconcile those tensions within the Global Gateway ideology. Nevertheless, I think it's important to point out that from the very beginning, the Sustainable Development Goals and the achievement of Agenda 2030 were all about using the public balance sheet to try to leverage private sector investment in the global goals and in global goods generally. That was the paradigm. So it's not so much that there has been a huge change in the paradigm around Global Gateway. However, if you begin to lift the lid a little bit on what Global Gateway actually is, there is very little emphasis on leave no one behind. There's very little emphasis on least developed countries. There's very little emphasis on fragility. All of the emphasis is on opening new trade routes, accessing critical raw materials. All of the references are trying to be a rival to China for access to these critical raw materials. And very rarely do you, I think maybe rarely, but not as often as you'd like, do you see the priorities of developing countries emerging. And the tension there, of course, is that in our treaties in the European Union, we are obliged to ensure that our development policy's main objective is the achievement of the eradication of poverty and, in the meantime, the reduction of poverty. So it is very difficult to reconcile these two things. So we're trying to change the Global Gateway. We're trying to make it more transparent. How are these investments leveraging human development indicators? This is not clear. What role does civil society have to play in the oversight of Global Gateway? What role does our development partners have? And ultimately, what does success look like for the Global Gateway? So, for the future, we are currently negotiating the Global Europe Instrument, which will be the successor to the NDICI Global Europe Instrument. And the good news is that the allocation for the 2028 to 2034 EU budget has increased from 108 billion to 200 billion approximately. However, we have to be conscious that within that figure also is funding for accession countries. So what we're trying to make sure, one of the crucial things is to maintain that 200 billion euro figure, but also to maintain what's currently in the Commission proposal, which is that 90% of that has to be fulfill the criteria for as ODA as set down by the OECD DAC. Currently, the proposal is 90%, but that can be changed by delegated act. And a delegated act, if you're not familiar with the way the European Union works, it effectively excludes the European Union, excludes the European Parliament from the decision-making process, and we're very much not satisfied with that proposal. So my committee that I chair, we're determined to ensure that we really adhere to our obligations under the treaties. We're very clear on that. We want to make sure that we keep the financial allocations for the next period, and we want to have the capacity to properly X-ray the global gateway, theoretically and in practice in the years to come. So Guillaume, that's broadly speaking where we are in terms of our priorities, and hopefully that's of assistance. I'm happy to stay on for another 20 minutes. Thanks.
Yeah, no, thanks so much. Thanks so much, Barry. This is excellent. And indeed, if you can say that's wonderful, but I know you have a busy day in front of you. But thanks. It's been great just to hear the insider's perspective around some of these negotiations. That's been very helpful. Let's now move to Madame Eleni Nicolaidou. You are expert minister, counselor, and part of the Cyprus presidency of the Council of the EU team. You are actually a chair of the Working Party on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. It's actually, great from this perspective that this Working Party still exists within the Council of the EU. And you're, of course, part of the Cyprus Ministry of Finance. So I understand you might have a slide deck where you might walk us through some of the priority of the Cyprus presidency, or maybe not. But perhaps if you could also perhaps share briefly the implications on the Cyprus presidency of the recent events in West Asia. We of course read about the situation in Cyprus over the past couple of days, and I think it's interesting for us and the audience to know whether you anticipate some implications on the priorities of the Cyprus presidency.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues from Nicosia. Thank you very much for inviting the Cyprus presidency. Unfortunately, it's rather sad that Cyprus assumed the presidency of the EU Council in the middle of dramatic geopolitical upheaval and predictability. A war has started in our neighborhood, and we don't know when it's going to end, with dramatic consequences. Europe, of course, has faced complex crises before and managed to respond to the demands of the times by evolving and stepping up. However, we can't have sustainable development without peace, a pillar for the 2030 agenda. The Cypriot government has emphasized from the start, and our president is emphasizing all the time, that that is not involved in any military operations and maintains its role as a regional bridge for diplomacy. The Iranian strike, particularly a drone incident near the British base at Raf Akrotiri, and I must clarify that they are sovereign bases, directly impacted the island and the Cyprus presidency, forcing, of course, a revaluation of in-person logistics. In early March, due to security concerns and disruptions in air transport, some of the meetings of the presidency are made in virtual format. Some high-level meetings were postponed. For example, the meeting of European affairs ministers, culture ministers, ECOFIN, defense ministers. The situation is dynamic, with the Cypriot government working to balance its role as an honest broker within the EU, while managing the immediate consequences of the regional instability. The Cypriot presidency will work, of course, towards a more autonomous Europe through security, defense readiness, and preparedness. In particular, the focus are on the following topics as priorities of the presidency: a more competitive Europe that will be better placed to secure sustainable growth, an autonomous Europe but open to the world, an autonomous union that leaves no citizen behind, a long-term budget that will ensure strategic autonomy through sufficient financing for EU's common goals. Now, as regards the overall priorities for the Agenda 2030 of the Working Party of the EU Council, our priorities are summarized as follows: development of a more circular and resource-efficient economy, climate adaptation and resilience, promotion of competitive, sustainable development, resilient agriculture, policy coherence for sustainable development. Now, as regards SDGs, the Cyprus presidency focuses on three SDGs: SDG 6, SDG 11, and SDG 14. SDG 6 is, of course, as you all know, is clean water and sanitation. The reason that we opted for this SDG is because the progress is lacking compared to other SDGs. It is among the goals require more attention, and especially it has a fundamental role in other sectors like health, agriculture, and food security, political stability, and sustainable development. Of course, at the global level, the UN is organizing this year a conference on water in December. SDG 6 also is under review at the UN HLPF 2026. The objective is to link SDG 6 to the Mediterranean Strategy for Sustainable Development 2026-2035 and other relevant initiatives. Now, as regards SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities, it is also under review at of this year's HLPF. It relates to European Commission's priorities to make housing more affordable and more sustainable, and is related to other EU strategies, for example, the anti-poverty strategy, the European Affordable Housing Plan, and the strategy for generational renewal in agriculture. The objective is to give emphasis to the role of local authorities and municipalities in achieving SDG 11. SDG 14, Life Below Water, it was a key focus of an in-depth review at the HLPF 2025. However, Cyprus is an island state and considered this goal as extremely important. It promotes EU leadership in advancing international ocean governance and promotes the EU Ocean Pact. Now, other key priorities for which we are working presently is the preparation of HLPF key political messages. They are underway. The preparation is underway. Other priorities of the Cyprus presidency is the emphasis on the role of the private sector, the environmental, social, and corporate governance. We wish to demonstrate the importance of ESG model in achieving the SDGs and highlight the role of the private sector in general, and in particular the SMEs. The communication of SDGs is also a priority for us. We intend to organize an event in June before the end of our presidency. And of course, the post-2030 agenda, we plan a meeting in the context of the Working Party in April. And the Cyprus presidency believes that the post-2030 should continue with the framework of 2030 agenda. It should be retained, but with an extended timeline, adaptation to current realities, and strengthen implementation mechanisms to drive real change. These are the main priorities. I can answer any questions you wish. Thank you very much.
No, thank you, Madam Nicolaidou, for your intervention and for sharing the general priorities of the Cyprus presidency, but also sharing your thoughts on the immediate implications of the war in West Asia on the presidency of Cyprus. I heard that there's some SDGs that are being prioritized, 6, 11, 14, and that you are also thinking about the post-2030 agenda as well. HLPF was mentioned also in your statement just now. Just to say that I believe Albania, a neighboring country of Europe, will play an important role this year as co-facilitator of the HLPF declaration. The report that we're presenting here today does cover not only the EU member states, but also partner countries and candidate countries as well. Let's now turn it over. We'll have one speaker in between Cyprus speakers, because we'll have Phoebe, of course, speaking in a moment. But in between, we'll put the European Commission, and we're very happy to have you, Lucien. Lucien, you are a policy coordinator at the European Commission in the Skills, Jobs and Social Affairs at the Secretariat General, known as SecGen. I believe you are, if I want to sum it up, one of the focal point, at least, on the SDGs within the European Commission. So please give us your perspective on how Europe is moving this agenda forward and implementing the SDGs in the context of multiple global crises.
Thank you, Guillaume. Thank you for the invitation to speak. Indeed, I was asked to make a short intervention on pathways to sustainable development by 2030. Regarding the beginning of our exchange here, I will not comment on matters outside of my remit. Just to point out that this morning in Strasbourg, the European Parliament plenary had an important debate on matters of interest attended by the President of the Commission. So maybe there are some things that you want to check in how that developed there. For my part here with our defense of the SDGs, I need to reiterate that even in these difficult times for multilateralism, the Commission reaffirms its full commitment to the 2030 agenda and the SDGs. As your annual report recognizes, Europe has long been a leader in promoting sustainable development and UN-based multilateralism, and we stand, of course, by that. As said also before, the Commission's commitment to sustainable development predates the 2030 agenda. The principles of sustainable development are very much anchored in our European treaties. And also, as has been noted, the SDGs remain an integral part of our political guidelines of President von der Leyen, of this current Commission, and they are embedded in our proposals, policies, and strategies. I'll come back to that in a second. As Ambassador Donoghue noted, each commissioner is responsible to deliver SDGs within their policy areas, as set out in the mission letters, and the College as a whole is responsible for overall implementation. This puts sustainable development really at the heart of European policy making. While the primary responsibility rests with member states, again, has been noted, the Commission implements the 2030 agenda through a whole-of-government approach, and we've clarified many years ago already what that entails, which places the SDGs at the core of our policy and legislation and funding alike. Now, on the Commission's work program, which encompasses a range of policy areas and initiatives that are designed to support the implementation of the 2030 agenda, although, of course, there are no mentions all the time, but it is worth noting that the Commission presented last year the Competitiveness Compass. This is a roadmap to restore Europe's dynamism and secure sustainable prosperity. So here, due to the discussion before that links sustainability with competitiveness. So we are also trying to achieve that. And the Compass builds on the analysis in the report written by Mario Draghi on the future of European competitiveness. It provides our strategic framework to guide the Commission work throughout this mandate. So this is really at the core of what we are doing now and continue to be doing in the following years. Just as examples, so first of all, the three key imperatives that the Competitiveness Compass specifies for enhancing EU competitiveness. It refers to closing the innovation gap, developing a joint strategy for decarbonization and competitiveness, and also increasing security while reducing excessive dependencies. And examples of these of key actions that are helpful, conducive to improving to achieving these imperatives and improving the SDGs are various initiatives that we already put on the table and will continue to do so. I refer to the Clear Industrial Deal, that is a cross-cutting initiative, an action plan on affordable energy, vision for agriculture and food, very much related to sustainable agriculture, SDG 2, but also farmers, livelihoods, rural areas, a union of skills, a water resilience strategy, sustainable transport investment plan, and many more. So also on the leave no one behind side of things, it is also a very important dimension for our efforts. As President von der Leyen noted at the European Employment and Social Rights Forum last week, competitiveness is not an end in itself. It is what underpins our citizens' well-being and sustains our social model. It shapes citizens' daily lives, their jobs, their security, their standards of living. And this year, key deliverables under the Union of Skills are a strategy on vocational education and training, for example, as well as an education package, which include, among other things, a 2030 roadmap on the future of digital education and skills. So we're trying to keep beyond top of the most recent and salient developments in the world. Moreover, a skills portability initiative will be featured in a fair labor mobility package, with the objective of facilitating the recognition of qualifications across the bloc, including from third countries, and ensure that workers can seize new opportunities wherever they live in the EU. The Commission is also committed to strengthening social dialogue in line with Europe's social market economy. The Commission also aims to tackle the issues which European families face every day. In this respect, the European Affordable Housing Plan, put forward in December last year, is an important element, as well as the first ever EU anti-poverty strategy that is due to be adopted in the next period, which will address structural causes of exclusion and strengthen support services. Also important, last week, the Commission adopted its strategy on intergenerational fairness and the gender equality strategy, 2026 to 2030. And it is worth taking a closer look, actually, to the strategy on intergenerational fairness, because this presents a new intergenerational contract to its readers, reflecting on the need to expand opportunities over time, address disparities across territories, and ensure that decisions are taken with a longer-term perspective in mind. It provides a common framework for aligning foresight, fairness, and responsibility so that today's choices strengthen opportunities for both current and future generations, and also strengthen EU's social fabric by bringing generations together around common goals, shared responsibility, and a collective investment in the future. Coming to external action, the EU and member states have long been at the forefront of supporting global efforts to promote sustainable development. This has been noted in partner countries as well as at home. Of course, we are aware of the turbulent global context. We note with grave concern that multiple and interlinked crises continue to impede progress towards the SDGs in many parts of the world. Meanwhile, the annual SDG financing gap is very big, and mobilizing private sustainable finance at scale is therefore essential. This has been noted by Mr. Andrews just before. This is why exactly Global Gateway seeks to do it. That's its focus in the area of international partnerships. It is designed to crowd in private capital by combining different EU external action tools to de-risk investments while remaining closely aligned with partner countries' priorities. And Global Gateway will remain our main tool for delivering externally on global sustainable goals. On SDG progress overall, as the most recent Eurostat monitoring report demonstrates, this is the report that has been adopted last summer, and the new edition is incoming with the next European semester spring package. This notes thus that the EU has made significant progress over the last 5 years towards its objectives and targets related to reducing inequalities in particular, as well as sustainable economic growth, labor market participation, and quality education. We have also progressed in many other SDGs, albeit at a slower pace. This is also a little bit compatible with the findings of the SDSN report, which of course uses a different selection and weighting of indicators. There are, of course, differences due to methodology and also significant differences in the progress levels at national and subnational level, and those require, of course, the attention of relevant authorities. And so we continue with our monitoring. We hope that this year's report will show further improvements in SDG level by the EU and by its member states. And I come to the conclusion now, and the conclusion is that 2030 Agenda remains our global roadmap to tackle the crisis and challenges the world faces, which are deeply interconnected. And the full implementation of the 2030 Agenda is key to strengthening the world and EU's resilience against current and future shocks. Therefore, we are fully focused to delivering progress and accelerating progress as much as possible before 2030. Thank you for your attention.
No, thank you. Thank you, Lucien, for joining, and in general, for always being available whenever we discuss this topic throughout the years, either here in webinars or also at the European Economic and Social Committee to discuss these issues. Thanks for sharing some of the most recent also policy developments, including this new strategy on intergenerational fairness and this sort of long-term planning perspective that emerged from this document. Also, thanks for mentioning of course, the Eurostat monitoring report. For the audience here today, we published an academic paper a few years ago where we compared the differences between various SDG monitoring tools between SDSN, Eurostat, and the OECD. And of course, as you mentioned, Lucien, there's differences in methodologies that can lead to also differences in results. One of the difference is that in the SDSN report, everything is benchmarked against an aspirational target to define whether targets are on track or off track. I believe in the case of Eurostat, whenever there's no agreed political targets, a 1% increase is estimated as being significant progress. 1% might be great progress when you're close to the target, but if you start from very low, 1% might not get you extremely far by 2030. So this is one of the difference, and why perhaps in certain areas the SDSN report might be a little bit harsher in terms of key findings and results. There's other differences, including in the case of SDSN, the coverage of external spillovers to a large extent within the report, those impacts outsourced abroad. Let's move now to the last speaker in this block, in this discussion. Last but certainly not least, Professor Phoebe Koundouri, co-chair of the UN Global Sustainable Development Report, chair of the UN SDSN Global Climate Hub, co-chair of SDSN Europe, director of A4IA. You have many, many more also hats and responsibilities. So I'll stop here just to say for everyone in the audience also that as a reminder, when people like David Donahue and other founders of the SDGs set up this agenda, there was also an effort to ensure that there would be accountability and regular monitoring around the SDGs, at least in three ways. There's, of course, the annual voluntary national review process. And as a reminder, 190 countries actually presented their VNRs. 36 additional countries will present VNRs in July. And this is, of course, connected to the high-level political forum. So that's one element of accountability. The other one is, of course, there was an SDG indicator framework that was adopted in parallel to the goals and the targets. And there's an annual reporting also made by the UN Statistics Department on global progress made around the goals. And then another process is that every 4 years, there is an independent group of scientists appointed by the UN Secretary General that presents a very important and impactful report, which is called the Global Sustainable Development Report. And we're very lucky today because Professor Phoebe Koundouri was appointed as the co-chair of this independent group of scientists and is currently working on the 2027 edition of this report, which will be presented, I believe, in September 2027 on the sidelines of the next SDG summit at heads of state level. So there's been a 2019 GSDR, a 2023 GSDR, and Phoebe is currently leading the 2027 GSDR. So Phoebe, if you could share with us a little bit about this process, and also, of course, talk about your work on the pathways and your contribution to the report this year.
Yes, thank you, Guillaume. I'm always excited to share a panel with you, and especially when it comes to the Sustainable Development Report for Europe. So I've always been working. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can. We can. Yes.
I've always been working on integrated systems that can allow us the transformation to a sustainable pathway of the economic, the social, and the environmental system. And I've always seen the almost permanent current multi-crisis, ecosystems crisis, inequality crisis, economic crisis, geopolitical crisis as the result of the missing integrated policy framework that will allow us to see that our problems derive from the siloed approach to dealing with each system that is in crisis. And of course, my career spans over 30 years. In 2015, we had the almost perfect policy framework for sustainable development, an integrated policy framework between the biosphere, society, and economy, 17 goals, 169 targets that allows us to pave our pathways to sustainable development. So one important message of what I am doing within the UN Global Sustainable Development Report that is coming out, as Guillaume said, in 2027, and it's a crucial one because it's the last one before the 2030 deadline. The work that I am doing via my collaboration with SDSN and the work that I am doing leading IFORIA Research Center is that we need to break silos and build systems transformation pathways that are science-based, stakeholder co-design, and blended finance supported. And in doing so, we need to be clear about the fact that peace is both the pathway to sustainability transformation and also their most important outcome. So we need to translate public goals into investable projects, long-term needs into fund-compatible assets, and risks that exist to risks that are priced and allocated, and do that in an era, in a space of collaboration and coordination. The current collapse of the multilateral system and the geopolitical collapse is really a very unsettling situation and not supporting situation of where we want to go. Now, the Global Sustainable Development Report that I co-chair is the final window to 2030. The Global Sustainable Development Report is the United Nations flagship scientific assessment on global sustainable development. So it's an assessment of assessments of how far we have reach the implementation of the SDGs, but it's also the key scientific input to the deliberations of the UN High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. The last before the deadline of 2030, global SDR will focus on giving evidence-based policy guidance for integrated systemic action, will bring into the spotlight the need for accountability in order to accelerate progress with regards to implementing the SDGs, and will also, and importantly, lay the foundations for sustained action beyond 2030. The narrative that I am introducing the report with is that the SDGs are a brilliant and comprehensive framework for transformation towards sustainable development. Also, humanity already possesses the science, the technology, the policies, and even the financial resources, both public and private, to achieve them. A lot has been achieved. It is important to have this registered. A lot has been achieved. 196 countries signed, 193 countries submitted VNRs, 20% of implementation of the goals has been achieved across the world. And for this to be achieved, we had to transpose policy frameworks, huge policy frameworks, into SDG relevant frameworks. And the flagship transposition of SDGs into a policy framework is, of course, the European Green Deal, and it remains to be so even after the Draghi report, even after competitive compass, because competitive compass does not say anything more or less than sustainable development is hugely important and should be achieved via competitiveness, via security and independence, and via focusing on innovation. Our key challenge, and this is what I said at the key challenge of the Global Sustainable Report 2027, is that while the SDGs provide direction, there is no robust structure explicitly tasked with driving their implementation of scale. So what Professor Sachs was saying, we have our targets, yes, but do we have a plan for achieving the targets? And do we articulate this plan in a way that is robust and convincing enough to achieve implementation at scale? What we need is an operational global commons, creating transparency, capacity, accountability, and ensuring effective coordination and delivering results on the grounds. And this is what I am offering based on the 30 years of work, a three-step approach for a global commons for implementing the SDGs. The first step is about continuous measurement, monitoring, and assessment. This is exactly what the SDSN is doing with reports like the European report, much more as well, but it gives us a firm and quantified assessment of where we are. The second step is about creating the pathways for SDGs and national commitments implementation. So we have a detailed plan for moving from where we are, which we measure in step 1, to where we want to go, which is represented by SDG targets and national commitments of regions of the world and countries of the world and subnational scales in each country of the world. And in doing this exercise of developing detailed pathways, we need to take into account the stakeholders. Not only take them into account, but make them co-designers and co-owners and shareholders of the pathways. The third step is to identify the investment portfolios and the public and private finance that will make those portfolios actually happen. So if you wanted the full picture of what is the operationalization that can be provided and is already provided by Euphoria, is a global commons, fully digitalized, bringing together the wealth of data that currently exists, geospatial, socioeconomic, real-time data, and then fitting this data into our modeling. Our constraints are the planetary boundary, and then in a beyond GDP approach, meaning that you take into account not only traded goods and services and financial goods and services, but also all the externalities having to do with natural capital and human capital and cultural capital. You optimize each and every sector of the economy, the energy sector, the transport sector, the water sector, the land use sector, the marine use sector. And in optimizing and integrating your analytical models of each and every sector of the economy and constraining them by planetary boundaries and equality considerations, you can then construct a digital twin of your country, of your region, of the world, bringing natural systems, infrastructure system, economic and social system into coordination for moving to sustainable development. And of course, as I said before, nothing can be done without the co-design of all stakeholders. At the end of the day, with this approach, you have continuous SDG measurement and monitoring, and you also have explicit pathways for needed policy governance transformations, technology transformation, capacity building transformations, and finally, the portfolios of investment, and they are financing the recommendations of where they need to be financed for. And it is in this space that accountability, transparency, first of all, capacity, second of all, into getting into the nitty-gritty details of creating the plan to get you to your targets and goals, and at the end of the day, accountability. You said you endorsed the SDGs. Okay, what have you done? What have you achieved? And what is the future plan to further accelerate implementation? In this framework, SDSN Global Climate Hub works, and it implements this extended modeling in order to derive exact plans for SDG implementation and acceleration of its implementation across Europe, Asia, and Africa. You can get on the website in order to see all the details and results. With regards to the European report, there is a lot of detail that is in the Global Climate Hub European report on how the energy model, the water model, the land use model, the economic model should transform in order, and I'm closing in 1 minute, should transform in order to achieve the SDGs. But let me just give you the main result.
Maybe because this will be also covered, I think, in the Q&A and for the next session. So because I know Lucian has to leave, and I'm just looking at the questions in the chat, but also via email. So I just wanted to make sure we had just a brief moment to for a Q&A, and we'll continue the conversations on solutions and pathways and so on. In the chat, there's 2 blocks of questions, and Lucian, you'll start first because I know you have to leave imminently. Some are related to monitoring. Some are related actually to the broad topic of leaving no one behind, especially intergenerational fairness, with specific questions also on youth and future generations. Lucian, very quickly, and I'll ask a very straightforward question. The EU became in 2023 the first continent to actually present a EU-wide voluntary review. Can you tell us whether there's any plans to actually update or present another version of this EU voluntary review, or perhaps more generally, what do you anticipate might be the contribution of Europe in the run-up to the 2027 SDG summit that has a state level?
Yeah, thank you for the floor. Indeed, I need to move on. It's been a pleasure to contribute here. Yes, we are of course following the developments, the changes that start at global level and with various other contributors related to the post-2030 framework. So for the moment, we are really looking into that. There are still 4 more years in which one can make a lot of progress. And so that we're really focused on delivering that, as I said. The UVR, yes, thank you for the kind words, view of Ambassador Donoghue. Indeed, it's been quite an extraordinary piece of work. It was presented in 2023. That was the midterm of the implementation of the 2030 agenda. And it's been quite a particular product, as has been noted, and we are very happy to see that it still echoes to this day, as it's important, has not subsided. At the moment, the Commission is not considering another such report. So we will see you further on what are the developments.
And of course, as you mentioned, Lucian, Eurostat continues to monitor each year the performance of Europe on the SDGs. And there's other great technical agencies of the European Commission that are doing phenomenal work. I just want to give a shout out also to the European Joint Research Center that has a wonderful SDG mapping tool, which is a global public good that allows to track very quickly SDG alignment in any policy document. So Lucian, I know you need to run, but thank you again for being with us today, and good luck in your next meetings. For the other panelists in the previous session, I think let's try perhaps to have a short answers in 1 or 2 minutes. There's been a few questions, and by the previous session, by the way, I also include Ambassador Donoghue here, of course. There's been a few questions around intergenerational fairness, children and youth. I think when we look at the world, of course, when we see on one side the global conflicts rising, military conflicts and crises, but also on the other side, the digital revolution on the way, including with artificial intelligence, which, as we see in the labor market, is impacting in particular, entry-level jobs and youth. And I think there's a lot of anxiety also among students about whether the skills that they will actually learn will be useful in 3, 4, or 5 years. So perhaps in 1 or 2 minutes, if each of you could share a few words. I mean, there's a general, I think, consensus that is emerging that this issue of especially the digital revolution must be perhaps better incorporated in the future post-2030 framework. So if perhaps all of you, David, Madame Nicolaidou, Phoebe, could perhaps share, I think Barry Andrews had to leave, but if you could perhaps share your perspective on this broad topic of intergenerational fairness and the special attention on youth. So I don't know who wants to go first. Perhaps Phoebe, I see you have your microphone.
I'm available if others.
Yes, but let's try to keep the responses short, because then
it's very important. Intergenerational fairness is actually one of the building blocks of sustainability. Sustainability means that I take into account the short, medium, and long run in a way that I am resilient in the long run, based on the decision that I made in the short and medium run. So it's not a side, let's say, parallel concept, but it is in the heart of sustainability to solve this very difficult problem, not only conceptually, not only difficult for the policymakers, but also very difficult in terms of the mathematical structure of the problem, to make sure that what you decide today is relevant in the medium run and in the long run is crucial. And it is not just about understanding that the relevant discount rates, the social discount rates, need to be a declining function of time, because this means that you are giving more weight. If the discount rates are a declining function of time, you are giving more appropriate weight to generations that are coming after you. But it is also about the whole mindset, needing to understand that your environmental ecosystem resources are relevant for the generations to come, that the way you build social structures and institutions need to be equitable for the generations to come, and that your economic system is not just about achieving profit within constraints in the short run or even medium run. They have to be sustainable in the long run. And this is the only way you can achieve growth, sustainable growth, meaning growth that can support the welfare of people across the globe.
Thank you, Phoebe. Let's move to another, to your fellow Cyprus citizen, Madame Nicolaidou, please.
Yes, I think Phoebe I share the same ideas as Phoebe. For the Cyprus presidency, the intergenerational strategy is very important, and it's one of the areas that we're going to discuss within the Working Party for Sustainable Development. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us. And then last but not least, David, please. I think you're on mute, or we can't hear you.
There we are. Sorry.
Yeah, that's good.
I was very glad that the Pact for the Future a couple of years ago included a declaration on intergenerational fairness. And as people will know, this has been a theme at the UN for a long time, but nothing much was done about it. It first came up, I think, at the Rio summit in 1992. But I'm glad that it's now formally recognized as a responsibility which the UN, or as a dimension which has to be factored in very carefully to all agreements. We did try to underline the importance of youth in implementing the SDGs. We had various references in the declaration at the time, but I'm glad that it has been sort of brought more formally into focus. The fact is that the energy we need to achieve the SDGs was always going to be delivered by young people most of all, and will always be. In a way, we were creating an agenda for their generation, if I can safely exclude myself from it. And so at the time, they grasped this. Young people came to the summit in 2015 eager to get started. In fact, on a minor anecdotal level, we wondered, would the phrase sustainable development be somehow off-putting? Not at all. They could almost quote the entire agenda to me. So their enthusiasm was huge at the time and has remained huge. That's why I think it's a really important thing, and I wish we could answer all the questions more fully. On the digital aspect, yeah, it's fairly clear to me this is going to be a major feature for the next agenda. It was always clear that we would, but that there would be great potential in the new technologies, but it's something that has really come into its own with AI and so on. There's a lot of rapid progress that can be made in achieving the SDGs by utilizing new digital technologies. So I think it's going to be, it will be a dominant topic in any future negotiations.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, David, and thank you to all the panelists for the second block of the discussion. We still have more than 100 people connected after an hour and a half of talking about the SDGs. So thank you for doing such a great job and I think being extremely insightful and interesting for all of us. We'll now turn to the last part of our discussion, because we wanted to make sure that we're also covering the question, of course, of long-term pathways, solutions, and civil society engagement. So we have three wonderful speakers with us today that will discuss the role of structured engagement with civil society, but also of scientific pathways, consortiums, and networks to advance these transformations. We will start first with Mr. Stoyan Chukanov, president of the NAT section. NAT section stands for Agriculture, Rural Development and Environment at the European Economic and Social Committee. For those that are not familiar with the ESC, it's a branch, and Stoyan, you'll correct me in a moment if I'm wrong, but it's basically the branch of the European Commission that focuses on structured engagement with civil society, including trade unions, business associations, NGOs, scientists, and also involving the institutions in some of the debates. And I believe the ESC has published a number of very strong and brave opinions recently, including on phasing out fossil fuels, but also on the nexus between climate and peace, which, by the way, goes both ways. And in 2019, we came up, the SDSN and ESC, with this concept of Green Deal SDG diplomacy as a way for Europe to leverage its internal market to advance the green and digital transformations in a multipolar world. The ESC was, of course, involved in the preparation of the EU voluntary review back in 2023 with a formal mandate to engage with civil society. So there's been a lot of leadership from the ESC on this agenda. So Stoyan, first of all, correct anything that I said that might be wrong. And second of all, please tell us your views on the ESC contributions to this agenda. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And one more time, thank you very much for this long-term contribution and the partnership that we have with SDSN. And of course, for launching actually the report in our committee here, because yes, I'm not going to correct you a lot, but yes, we have a very specific role in connecting the European civil society organizations with the legislators in the political view. And a slight difference, we are separate official EU institution created under the Treaty of Rome back in 1958 when everything started. So we are not attached to the Commission. No, we are consulting the Commission, but also the Parliament and the Council. So we are sitting in between. And we have our role. It's actually not only by referrals to prepare opinions on the given topics that are on any kind of sphere of the political and social life, etc. So we are representing the three groups rightfully pointed by you: employers, trade unions, and civil society organizations. So our added value actually is the consensus, because we have the debate here in our premises, and we are representing through our networks around 100 million European citizens. We are not nominated. We are nominated by the civil society organizations. We are not elected on the political base. So this is really the voice of the civil society, and I hate to quote myself, but we are bringing the real life to Brussels, because through our networks, through our members, we are bringing the topics and the issues that are really pressing the European citizens. So in this regard, we are looking for the SDGs as something that is really demanding the real involvement from the side of the civil society. And that's why we are providing opinions on all of the SDGs, basically, in a different way. But I think we should notice that 19 out of the first 20 countries in the SDG index are European member states. So obviously the civil society is kind of making progress. It's not enough, that's clear, we know that. But still, we have to really recognize that Europe was leading, and we hope we're going to stay this way. So that's why, by the way, we are actually hosting the only European official institutional body fully dedicated to the sustainable development and civil society engagement on the SDGs. This is the Sustainable Development Observatory. And today, right now, we have a meeting in the Sustainable Development Observatory, because actually the good news is that we've got the green light to prepare an own initiative opinion on the SDGs post-2030. So we're going to start the debate here in our committee. It's always, fact-based, and it's with a lot of arguments, because we have to reach the agreement not only among the social partners, but also the civil society organizations. And I love this quote. Actually, I'm in the Jacques Delors building right now, because that's the name of our building where I'm sitting right now. But yes, we represent both firefighters and architects, because through our members and through the engagement of the civil society, we have to act in both sides. How to deal with the pressing issues on the climate change right now, because we suffer, especially in the southern part of Europe, but also how to think about the future and be architects, how we are projecting our future in our continent. So through dialogue and through meaningful engagement with the platform that we are actually hosting here, we are providing some recommendations to the political bodies here in European Union, how to keep on, because the civil society, it's a special breed. We are not very happy from the reduction on the support of the multilateralism, for example. We are not happy of this lack of political empathy, to quote Ambassador Donovan. So that's why we need to stay active. And that's why I think your report is very useful tool for us. It's giving us guidelines how to focus really on where we're lagging behind. Because obviously in many SDGs, basically, many goals are not reached, and we are not happy as a civil society, especially in the biodiversity, climate adaptation, sustainable agriculture, and production, responsible production and consumption. Those are topics that really, right now, today we had a debate about the equality, so on. So thank you very much one more time, Guillaume. I'm open to questions.
No, thank you, Stoyan. And indeed, it seems like the ESC is not only supporting the work of the Commission, but of all actually the European leadership and institutions sitting basically in between and mobilizing in a structured way civil society, which I think is I mean, you know it, and I think your colleagues know it also. I'm a big believer in the role these days of these kinds of committees at the European level, but also at the national level, basically to provide a safe space for debate between people and organizations with very different interests, and as you said, to try to forge consensus. And I think this is specifically, especially useful in a context where we have actually complex transformations of our energy systems, food systems that have very different distributional effects and trade-offs. And so these need to be discussed with, of course, the social partners, the trade unions, also economic and business associations, as well as, of course, the scientists and the institutions. And I think this is precisely the role that the ESC play. I also want to commend the ESC for safeguarding freedom of speech over the past few years. I think this is an institution where all opinions are welcome and considered, and that has safeguarded over the past couple of years freedom of speech. So we'll go back. There will be some questions afterwards, but let's now move to Professor Prajal Pradhan at the University of Groningen. You're an expert in food system, climate change, and the SDGs. Your current research focuses notably, among many other things, on understanding the condition for long-term sustainability, urban transformations, and climate resilience. I believe you're also leading an important academic initiative and consortiums on the post-2030 agenda. You and your colleague Anne Warchol made a wonderful contribution to this year's report on the bioeconomy and the post-2030 agenda. So please, if you want to summarize the key points of these of your contribution and share your thoughts on the sustainability agenda in Europe.
Yeah, thank you very much for invitation. Yeah, and it was also our pleasure to contribute from our side. So basically, like our understanding of sustainability, like when we talk about sustainability, I would like to bring first what we understand by sustainability. So our understanding of sustainability is to build a societal foundation and prosperity, which is one of the key elements, and we need to build this within Earth system limit or within planetary boundaries now, because sometimes we forget that aspect now. So sometimes we push too much the issue of environment and forget the issue of society or economy. Yeah? Why I'm saying that? Because there are countries, there are populations which are deprived of basic social need or basic societal foundations, and we have to also take into account. Yeah, and in that context, in our group, what we are doing is that we are looking at especially this three different research avenues. I heard about SDG prioritization in Europe, and the question is like, yes, we need to have a SDG prioritization because there are 169 targets. There are 17 goals. But the problem is like how we are going to prioritize SDGs. Are we prioritizing based on cherry picking, or are we prioritizing based on some sort of like a holistic, systematic approach? In that context, what we are doing is like we are looking at synergies and trade-off among sustainable development goals. So depending upon the strategy we choose to meet one or other SDGs, there might be synergies. there might be trade-off. Now, for example, energy security can be made by heavily relying on fossil fuel, now, which might be good in terms of energy security for one goal, one target. But if you look at the renewable energy issues, then all other option would be to improve the renewable energy system, which will be having more synergistic effect across different SDGs. So in our research, we are looking at that sort of synergies and trade-off issues among SDGs, so that we can systematically prioritize SDGs. Now, not randomly cherry picking SDGs based on any hidden interests. Now, second point is that when you talk about SDGs are the politically negotiated goals. So in that sense, SDG might not be 100% perfect if we talk about long-term sustainability. And as there are only 2-3 years left to meet the SDGs, and also to talk about the post-2030 agenda, what we are doing is also try to understand the linkages between SDGs and the idea of long-term sustainability, basically looking at issues of how sustainable development goals are interlinked with issues of societal foundation, issues of planetary boundaries, and so on. We need to understand the strength and also the weakness of SDGs, so that we can do reform of SDGs in the process of post-2030 agenda. And in that context, we have like around 4 years left. So in next 4-5 years, we need to we need to adopt the new development agenda or new global goals that will be replacing the SDGs. Now we don't know what it will be now, but as a researcher, we have to prepare now if we want to contribute to make the post-2030 agenda more holistic, more better than the SDGs, more realistic than the SDGs. Now, so in that context, also we are working on that now. And basically, we use like a threefold approach for that. And our threefold research approach consists first on using quantitative data analysis. Now we use data that is provided by SDSN, that is provided by Eurostat, United Nations, and so on. Now we also use modeling results, because we need to use data to understand what's going on there. And Professor Forbe also presented this idea of digital twins and so on. So data is important, but most important is like when we look at the patterns in the data and so on, we also need to understand the mechanism behind those interactions, mechanism behind our observations. And often these mechanisms are not clear only looking at the data. So we need to dive deep into literature to understand that, because sustainable development or sustainability is a debate that's happening not only during SDGs time, but long before SDGs. So what we do is like we systematically look at the literature to understand the mechanism behind those SDG interactions, which we call like a qualitative analysis. Our qualitative analysis also look at the policy documents, because sometimes there are also incoherence between the policies. For example, when you look at the bioeconomy policy of European Union, we can see and then map that with bioeconomy principle and sustainable development goals. We can see gaps over there, and that's why we do this quantitative analysis of policies and literature. And the third is definitely the knowledge co-creation with the stakeholders. That's our third approach, where we do workshops. We do joint workshops to co-create knowledge in terms of looking at those synergies and trade-off, but also to look at the issue of the post-2030 agenda. In that context, in 2024, in 2025, we are doing different types of workshops at the University of Groningen. In 2027, in April, we are also planning a big Groningen Sustainability Conference, where we want to bring, let's say, scientists, policymakers, civil society, and also the private private sector together to come up with some discussion about what sort of lessons we have learned throughout the process of SDGs, which will be helpful also as an input for the summit for the SDGs summit in the September. Yeah, and also beforehand the process over there. I would like you to thank for the invitation. I would like to stop here my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prajal, and also, well, thank you in general for your leadership in moving forward the literature on SDG interlinkages, trade-offs, and for sort of your systemic rather approach to this. Of course, and I think Ambassador Donou had to leave, but I think when you adopt a framework with 17 goals, 169 targets, you don't expect countries to have 17 distinct strategies and 169 even strategies to achieve those targets. There are synergies and trade-offs across those goals and targets. So I think you made, among the most significant contribution in this literature with your colleagues, of course, at the University of Groningen, and to connect also with the work that Phoebe is doing. Past GSDR reports have proposed sort of 6 entry points to address some of those interlinkages and have systemic approaches to implementing the SDGs. At the SDSN, there was this paper where Jeff was, of course, the lead author of this in 2019 with 6 SDG transformations. They're not so different, these entry points and transformations. And I think one of the let's say, progress that was made, let's say, over the past couple of years, at least, of the SDGs, is that we start talking a similar language when it comes to what are the key systemic transformations that need to happen. And hopefully we can build on this, of course, beyond 2030 in terms of operationalizing, of course, the framework. Last but not least, let's move to my colleague, Davide, analyst within the Fable team. Fable is, of course, an SDSN program that provides long-term modeling scenarios and pathways for sustainable agri-food systems. So, Davide, you were the lead author of a contribution this year in the report where the Fable model was used alongside other colleagues within SDSN. So, please, Davide, the floor is yours, and then we'll take perhaps 1 or 2 questions also, and we will close. Davide, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Guillaume. Hello, everyone. I'm Davide. So Guillaume already introduced me and the Fable. So we contributed in estimating fair levels of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture for the European Union until 2050. And so we decided to focus on agriculture because of Fable's goal and interest. That is to co-develop and co-design with country teams integrated food and land use system pathways. So let's start, and of course, with one of the most important statement that represent climate equity that has been expressed during the Earth Summit in Rio in 1992, the common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. So in this framework, it means that this statement means that all countries, all states have to, in a way, contribute in reducing emissions and to tackle this common global problem. But at the same time, it also tells us that all countries, each country has a different responsibility and capability to abate emissions. So this statement has also been used in formulating the Paris Climate Agreements in 2015, and recently in Europe, in the European Union, with the effort sharing regulation for setting these binding targets for 2030 for our member state in the European Union. And this is based on GDP per capita. So it basically means that the richer a country, for speaking from per capita point of view, this country will have to contribute more in reducing emissions based on its economical capacity. We decided to, of course, based on the literature, to develop our methodology based on different principles and approaches. And so we end up with 3 of them: responsibility approach, capability, and equality. So according to the responsibility approach, the countries that emitted more in the past years and has contributed more to climate change in the past has to now take the lead in reducing and abating emissions. So this means that this, according to this approach, historical agricultural greenhouse gas emissions in the past are considered. For the capability approach, it's very similar to the one that is used in the ESR, so recently used in the European Union, and it's based on GDP per capita, but also a vulnerability index. And finally, equality. The idea behind the equality principle is that all people in the world should be, let's say, entitled to emit the same amount of emissions. So it tries to reach an equal per capita GHG emissions. We also try to adjust these three approaches with agricultural indicators, yield gaps, and self-sufficiency ratio, because we wanted to bring this dimension of food security and food production, because of course one of the main goal is to reduce emissions and to fight climate change, but this has not to be detrimental to agricultural production and food security in the continent and in the world. So now let's see at the main results. But first, let's observe the past values, the past million ton CO2 equivalent from the agricultural sector. As you can see on the right, these are decreasing from 1990. And according to our pathway, the global sustainability pathway, that is a high ambition trajectory, emissions are going to decrease to 272 million tons CO2 equivalent. And so now we are comparing this, let's say this, where we are going in 2050 with the targets that are, let's say, imposed by our methodology following the three approaches. So here you can see the computed fair allowances by 2050 for according to the three approaches. So the maximum levels that the European Union can emit by 2050. As you can see, all of them are lower than what is the emissions that we projected to have in 2050. So it means that there is still a lot to do, and most of them, as you can see, all of them have different characteristics, and so they can really differ. They can really assign different budgets depending on the approach. And what we also try to do is to compare, to go in depth into the analysis to compare the different countries in the European Union and also the rest of the world. Here in this figure, you can see 5 European countries that are the ones that contributing into developing this global sustainability. And in particular, in the table, the percentage number indicates fair allowances expressed as share of projected emissions in 2050. So this means that if this value is lower than 100%, emissions are going to exceed the fair share allowances. So this signal an overshooting. So countries that are going to overshoot their carbon budget. If it's green, so if this value is over 100%, the projected emissions, it means that projected emissions are going to be lower than the fair allowances. As you can see, for the ability to pay approach, so the one that represents the capability and it's expressed using a vulnerability index and GDP per capita, none of the European countries is going to comply with that because, of course, as you know, we are one of the most of the richest continent in the world, per capita speaking. For the historical responsibility, Germany is going to not consume the entirety of its carbon budget. So it means that it will have a surplus of 37% of its 2050 emissions. So this is good news. And also Greece and Sweden, they are complying more than they are doing in the ability to pay approach. And finally, according to the equality principle, so the IEPC, Germany, Greece, and Sweden are going to fully comply with the fair share allocation, while also Finland and rest of the EU, they are going to increase their score. So all of this to say that, as you saw, based on the methodology, different reduction target can be expressed. All of them, let's say that all of them, they are in a way in line with the target of the European Union of reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the whole economy, a reduction of 90% by 2040. But of course, to do that, especially in a critical domain as agriculture, this can be done just by, of course, ensuring, like I said at the beginning, food security in the continent. And to do so, the European Union will need to implement at the same time supply side and demand side measures. So this means, of course, from the demand side point of view, trying to implement dietary shifts, so increased consumption of vegetables and pulses, so alternative protein sources, and trying to decrease meat and dairy consumption, and also putting in place and increase the quality of mitigation technologies in agriculture, trying to produce the same amount of food but with less emissions. We are going to, of course, also based on your feedback, we are going to improve our methodology. We are going to create new approaches where we want to compute allocations also looking at AFOLO emissions, so going beyond the agricultural sphere and also including the land use change emissions. And finally, we would like also to look at consumption-based emissions and not just a production-based like we did in this exercise. So I want to thank you for the attention. And of course, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Davide. And yeah, indeed, I mean, everything that you presented here and further information about the FABLE modeling work is available, of course, on the FABLE website. Perhaps one of the most difficult transformations, the transformation of agri-food systems, at least from the perspective of the global SDG index, one of the goals that is the most off track at the global level. We are past 3 p.m. Our goal was to manage to end by 3 p.m., but perhaps I can just, and thank you for being very generous with your time. Perhaps I can just finish with one and perhaps two questions to our panelists, and then we'll close. There was a question in the chat around the role of cities and regions. It seems like nation states are having a hard time collaborating these days, some of them at least, and that SDG progress might have stalled or being sometimes deprioritized. But perhaps that could also signal a bigger role for cities and regions in driving this agenda forward in the next couple of years. We heard from the Cyprus presidency that one of the SDGs prioritized was SDG 11 on cities. So perhaps all of you, I mean, I know, Phoebe, you've done a lot of work on this. Stoyan, I believe you're sitting at the ESC next to your neighbor, the European Committee of the Regions. And Davide, I believe in FABLE, you are doing also a fair amount of work in trying to localize also and have more and more granular and GIS results. So perhaps if all of you could comment on this, and then perhaps an additional question, and perhaps specifically to Phoebe and Stoyan. There was a question also on the review process for the SDGs. Perhaps Phoebe, in the GSDR discussions, are there emerging discussions around amendments or adjustments to the reporting and accountability model, and perhaps building on the voluntary national review process? But are there already discussions around the accountability framework and process? And perhaps Stoyan, your views about how civil society could be further engaged when it comes to monitoring, tracking, contributing to the efforts of the European Commission and other actors in monitoring SDG progress. So two questions, cities and regions, and then perhaps to Phoebe and Stoyan also on accountability frameworks and reporting. Phoebe, you seem ready.
Okay, cities and regions, we need to be clear that whatever we have on global level, we need to make consistent on regional level, we need to make consistent on national level, we need to make consistent on city level, and even at local authority level, and even at company level. So first, we need capacity at all scales. Second, cities are hugely important because they by 2050 they will host more than 70% of the population. Moreover, cities in most countries have the highest capacity of all scales, meaning national or local authority. Between these three scales, cities have quite high capacity in terms of understanding integrated approaches, systemic approaches. I don't want to refer to analytical capacity, but capacity in understanding that what I do in the energy system affects and is affected by the transport system, affects and is affected by the food system and land use system, and I need a holistic approach. Europe tried to do that in the previous multi-annual financial framework, that is tried to infiltrate financing at the level of regions, of cities, which I think is a very good approach, because this is where the capacity is, but also this is where accountability can be made more transparent. So cities are crucial. There are huge initiatives in Europe, but also across the world on cities. I call it a big project that is working with 150 regions and cities in Europe in order to identify, that is, develop the plans towards sustainability, and at the same time make these plans investment portfolios and bankable projects in order to be financed by private and public money. So very important. The second, on accountability, is one major axis of the Global Sustainable Development Report on 2027 is hugely central for us. So the first step towards accountability is creating the capacity. You cannot ask somebody to be accountable for progress with regards to SDGs if they don't have the capacity to articulate the pathways towards the SDGs. Second, accountability means serious integration of SDG monitoring and assessment and reporting back in the actual financial plan of a country or another scale, region of the world, or subnational level. So what is important is a legal responsibility to report back and connect that legal responsibility with making finance available. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Phoebe. Fascinating. Stoyan, can you comment perhaps on the role of cities and regions, but also the role of structured engagement with civil society to increase accountability on this agenda in Europe?
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, it's amazing, but so many European cities are doing really such a progress. And I was participating recently on the discussion about the public procurement, for example. So through the public procurement, many cities, they have very advanced already way how to tackle big portion of the SDGs and to achieve them, because that's through the food and the sustainable food and agriculture and how to organize the whole area. But it's really, I was fascinated by Copenhagen, by Paris, Milano, and Bergamo, etc., just to name a few. So this is, I think this is a growing movement on EU level, how certain cities are advancing faster than the national average, put it this way. So we should absolutely, we welcome this approach, and because somebody is going to be more advanced, that's clear. And of course, through the cooperation with the Committee of the Regions, like you rightfully pointed. How to involve even more the civil society through the civil society organizations. And we are providing here this platform, and we are really the direct connection to the legislators. And we have to, through our organizations, we are proving that the SDGs and the goals are still alive for the civil society. Although some political backlash, maybe it's already observed, but that's not the case, because speaking about different details, we agree that this is actually the way how to to achieve the competitiveness, but and climate change in the same time and all of this. So we do agree as a civil society representatives here. And yeah, so just be more active through the civil society organizations. It makes a change. It makes a change.
Yes, it does. It does. Thank you so much, Stoyan. And Davide, can you perhaps comment on the use of GIS and more granular technologies to localize a bit more the pathways and the models?
Yeah, sure. So, as in favor, for example, for now, what we do is to model which kind of land use is going to happen. So, for example, going from forest to cropland or from forest to cities. But what we are developing now is trying to understand where this is going to happen. So this is important, of course, to give importance not just at national level, but try to downscale the results at local level, eco-regional level, or like regional level. And this is done, of course, based on different equations, different priors and covariates, and of course using as benchmark the past land use changes that happen in a certain country to model where land use change is going to happen.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Davide, and thank you to all our panelists. We still have a critical mass of around 100 people connected, so it's great after 2 hours of discussion on the SDGs. We'll close here. I hope we managed to cover both the firefighter aspect of Europe. I started with this quote, of course, from Jacques Delors, that Europe needed firefighters, but also architects. And we're ending on this note, which is that since the SDGs were adopted, we do have more and more tools, pathways, models, data that are available and that hopefully can be further leveraged for implementing this agenda by 2030 and perhaps far beyond 2030. So a big thank you to all of you for joining, to the participants, to our dear speakers. Again, the report, the databases, all of this is available on the sdgtransformationcenter.org website. It's a public good. You can access it, reuse it, play with the data. The recording of this event will be put on YouTube, flagging that our next webinar will focus specifically on the post-2030 agenda. It will be a global webinar. It will be on the 1st of April. The information is available on the SDSN website. And with this, thank you very much. I look forward to seeing some of you in Paris, Brussels, or elsewhere in Europe in the coming weeks and months, and wishing everybody a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.